All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining. It's great to be up here with this fine group of folks, experts in e-commerce. I think we don't have a lot of time, so let's just get right into it. What I want to start this session is by asking each of you your perspective in your respective fields. Kind of what are the biggest challenges and opportunities that you're facing from an e-commerce perspective? And so, you know, we have a wide range of folks here from different areas of e-commerce, everything from beauty to food to an entire platform at Rakuten. So if each of you could take a second just to talk about, from your company's perspective, the biggest challenges and opportunities, that'd be very helpful to start this off.
I'm the first one? Okay, sorry. So in terms of what Rakuten looks at as a challenge, I think it's pretty concurrent to what all other e-commerce companies feel when they want to actually push out of their normal geographic ecosystem, is that a lot of times e-commerce relies a lot on networking effect to lower the CPA costs, the customer acquisition costs. And we look at initially how do you do this concurrently while building a strong ecosystem. When you do this locally, it's not really hard. But when you push out to, for example, if you're starting out in Japan and you want to move into Southeast Asia, it becomes a very big challenge because you don't have that leverage to be able to build up a strong moat and castle strategy to enable, you know, your original players to penetrate into different geographies. So definitely the fact that you don't have your original base of activity to influence, you know, positively your new base of activity is a big challenge.
Yeah, I think internally we always have this key challenge of building a great culture and building out the team. I think I heard this phrase where, you know, A-class companies, they know who to hire for the next 6 months and the next year. I think figuring that out is always a challenge for us. And externally, I think in the market, there has been a huge interest in beauty recently. So, you know, competitors moving into the beauty industry, I think will be a challenge that we have to overcome. Yeah.
I think in our business, well, food delivery is just a tough business in general. It's so logistically heavy. So I think the challenges for us are how do we make what seems to be a very simple thing very seamless? Because behind the scenes, you have people ordering, you have logisticals of getting that order to the restaurant, and they have to ask the question of how do we get that food to that person in a matter of a quick amount of time. So for us, the challenge is how do we make something that's so difficult very, very seamless on the user end? And as we progress forward, I think the challenge is how do we maintain that great quality of excellence for our users?
Okay, so sticking with food for a second, a big theme in e-commerce is global competition or global export, I would say, of technology. So you guys are facing a lot of competition as well. I think you've emerged as one of the leaders, clearly. Can you talk about what it's like to face essentially foreign competitors that are coming to the market today?
Sure, yes. Our space is very, very competitive. But I think the thing that makes us kind of stand out, especially in the Korean market, is food delivery with this particular vertical. It's so culturally dependent. And so when other companies try to move into Korea, they really have to understand not just the business part, but how do Koreans order? How do we eat? When do we eat? And that's something that I think we have a competitive advantage on. We understand this market incredibly well. We know the restaurants, the foods, when they eat, the type of people that want to eat the food. So when other companies from abroad try to move into Korea, I think our competitive advantage is we are culturally very much more tapped into this market, and that gives us an advantage.
Dino, why go global?
Why go global? I think Korean beauty is at this unique period where the products speak for itself. Korea is really becoming the new France in the world. You know, it's not only the you know, the technology of the manufacturers, but I think the branding and the marketing has really become a world-class level. So it's not only, you know, China or it's not only Southeast Asia, but I think our business in the US is really growing. And even in Europe, I think there is a great potential market for it as well.
대표님, how does Rakuten think about what global markets they should enter? It's a company based in Japan, but you're based in Singapore, right?
So in many ways, when we look at, you know, what companies to enter, what countries to enter for a business, just because we have so many businesses, we have the luxury of kind of picking and choosing our battles. So for example, if we want to enter the US market in an intelligent way, not only do we think about e-commerce, but we think about the other assets that we have. We have Viber, we have Kobo, we have different assets that we can use to our leverage. And once we kind of build a user base and loyalty out of that, then we start to build different pillars of businesses across that geography and subsector.
Is there a network effect to being global?
There is a network effect to being global, but I think in my case, in my company's case, that effect is only at a short to midterm timeline when you're able to, number one, go global, but be focused in going global.
Mike, in 5 years, do you think in food delivery there will be regional players that are dominant in their respective country? Or do you think there's going to be one or two global players that dominate several countries each?
Wow, that's a tough question. I think that what we're seeing in this space is that it is kind of merging. And so I think that there will be a few global players, but within these global players, the global players that will succeed will be the ones that understand that there has to be a local team that really understands. So there can be a parent corporation that owns many subsets or many countries in a sense, but this business is so localized that yes, there may be a merger and some high-level companies that consolidate this space, but the ones that do very, very well, I believe, in the next 5 to 10 years will be the ones that understand they have to give ownership at the local level. And if that happens, there will be some successful large conglomerates.
Well, okay, speaking of digital conglomerates, so let's talk about Alibaba for a second. So it's been an interesting ride since the IPO, right? A lot of feedback they're getting is to be more global, is to push their borders even further out, push their capabilities even more. I mean, I don't know if you guys benchmark Alibaba, but I'd be interested in your perspectives on Alibaba as a global kind of case study. Maybe you could start.
I mean, if you look at well, let's take a step back. If you look at Chinese companies have been heuristically and historically terrible at being able to push out globally. It's because of their mother country is so very much competitive that once anything happens in China, they retract all resources to actually be able to fight off their local competition. And it's a very tooth and nail competition that they're playing in their own markets. Now that being said, if you look at what Alibaba is doing right now, Jack Ma basically Jack Ma'd himself. There's a really funny saying where you Jack Ma your organization, where you basically replace all your current CEOs and heads of management to be able to suit that vector of business when you actually go to become bigger, right? So he replaced himself for a more global CEO. I think it's an interesting sales proposition and the value proposition that he makes to shareholders. But definitively, Alibaba and Rakuten has kind of had more of a benchmarking culture where, in many ways, Alibaba growing up has basically assimilated a lot of the basic business practices that Rakuten has done. They created a financial organization. If you look at their overall org structure, they have been very, very much reminiscent of the old Rakuten.
Mike or Dino, any other thoughts on Alibaba?
Just general thoughts on Alibaba? Or
well, this notion that they should be more global, is that a fair criticism of them today? And do you think they can be successful in their pursuit of that?
I wouldn't put my money against them. I think they're a very strong company. Outside of Alibaba, I think you have to look at just China in general and say, hey, look, they're going through kind of what America went through in their industrial revolution. You cannot doubt them right now just because some of the things may not be up to par. They may face different challenges, but I would not doubt that they're going to be a successful global player for years to come.
Right. I don't know enough about Alibaba to comment on this, but I think China companies have this mission of where they have to go global now. But I think it works the same way for U.S. companies to go into China as well. But I could see that Alibaba becoming a challenge for Korean companies in the next 5 years. Because they are building their logistics centers. They are building their services out in in Korea. They are building out their teams. So I do see them as I don't know about them well yet, but I think that we do have to have them in back of our mind to see what's going on in China.
It would definitely be a mistake to ignore them. You know, as Dino just mentioned, they're moving in forward. So rather than fighting that current, figuring out and understanding how to work with that is probably going to help more companies be successful in the future.
I mean, right now, if you look at it macroeconomically, Alibaba is faced with kind of a dual pressure. Number one is they've told a very good and very straightforward story to the New York Stock Exchange and the shareholders. But at the same time, they, in their future, have to find out how to make their win meaningful globally, right? And for them, the easiest path to take in terms of storytelling will be, yes, we're going to dominate the e-commerce marketplace, but actually to win meaningfully, that might not be the answer. So they really have to figure themselves out, align with their shareholders, and really understand how they want to be successful in their marketplace.
So I want to shift gears a little bit. I guess the title of today's presentation is Past, Present, and Future of E-commerce. You know, one trend we're seeing is vertical integration of e-commerce brands. So Mi미박스 is an example of this, where you started as a marketplace and then you went vertically. 배달의민족 is more of a marketplace model, but would you ever follow suit at like the Instacart and then try to do something more vertically integrated, or Sprague or something like that? Rakuten is obviously a platform. What are your thoughts? Maybe I'll start with not Dino, since you are the vertical brand. But what are your thoughts on verticalization within e-commerce?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, you could there's really just two options, right? You could be a mile wide and an inch deep, or you can be, an inch wide and a mile deep. And so my personal belief is that it's going to be highly verticalized. People, trying to be a one-fit-all solution is incredibly difficult in the e-commerce space. Each business, whether it's fashion, beauty, auto, food, knowing and understanding that space just takes years just to understand that one vertical. So I genuinely believe it's going to be highly vertical, it's going to be highly specialized, and it'll go down to region by region by region.
I mean, if you look at how more successful e-commerce companies or just overall platform companies have been successful in their own right globally, is what they do is they build out a really, really deep moat and castle strategy set in their home country, right? If you look at Rakuten, we have a e-commerce business, a travel business, a financial business. We have over 60, 70 subsidiaries. And, much like also in what the Amazon does, is that when we want to be able to be successful in a certain geography, we pull out one of those sticks and then we try to plant them in different places. And that transplanting process is very complicated, but if we do that correctly, we are able to actually, roll out a business in a very cost-effective manner, but also one that actually gives good benefit to the user base.
Dino, how were you able to go from a broader marketplace model to becoming a vertically integrated internet brand in cosmetics?
Right. I mean, we have about 1,000 partners on our platform that we sell. And looking at the data, we started realizing that there's a big gap between the consumers and the brands. A great example could be, our consumers were looking for pink in May, but they were getting these brown palettes from the brands. So we went back to the brands and then gave them the feedback of they might be looking for pink now. But it usually takes a brand to actually come up, to launch the product in the market would be around a year and a half. So we saw this gap. It's not that we wanted to vertically integrate, our company and build this new business model, but we just started understanding the consumers a little better. So if we were to build a private label, what do we really have to think about was the efficiency. And we found out this solution where we could deploy the product into the market within a quarter, within a 3-month period. So we launched our first product last September, and we sold 25,000 units in 40 minutes. So I think that was quite an amazing experience for us. We went that path of building that into a business model, and a big chunk of our business is coming from private label now. So we can't really see where we are headed, but I think there is a new type of consumers where we really have to start thinking from building a brand that's online based or mobile based. So another example could be, instead of working with a TV celebrity, we'll rather work with YouTubers to actually promote our products. Vertical integration, I think, will likely happen more in other industries as well. Yeah.
Thanks. I want to pause because we have a question from the audience that. Okay. 그 삼성의 루페이가 애플페이와 비교되면서 이커머스가 화두에 오르고 있는 것 같습니다. 둘 중에 무엇이 더 현실적이라고 생각하시나요? Do you guys understand that? So between Samsung RuPay and Apple Pay, if you compare those two, they're going to have some impact on the e-commerce market. What is more of a viable solution, I guess, between the two? I guess payments, taking a step back, payments is a big component that's driving e-commerce, right? Stripe, Alipay did an integration. There's all these different payment systems in locally. There are new payment solutions. Things like Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, what do you think that's going to make? What impact will that have on the e-commerce market?
That's a tough question.
Our audience asks the toughest questions. I like it. It's good.
To be honest, I may answer this in a kind of on a tangent, but when you look at these companies, there's no doubt that in the private sector, people want to pay easier. On the other side, users want to do that. I actually don't think that the challenge is coming from that side. What I see and will be the biggest global problem with payments is going to be how local governments and countries react to this. So if you look at the way the United States views global payments in this country alone, or just even online banking, there are so many different regulations. So when it comes down to payments, I think the challenge is not whether or not there's enough innovation. There's plenty of companies, and there'll probably be 10 more just today that will be in the space. I think the biggest challenge will be whether or not governments understand quickly enough that this is a huge opportunity. Will they allow the private sector to build these companies and strip down the regulations to make these efforts proper? So I know it's kind of a roundabout way, but I think the biggest challenge is now what's the difference between these companies? Because I think they're all great. KakaoPay, the innovation is there. The question is whether or not governments will allow these companies to thrive, and I think that will be the biggest challenge all of these companies face.
In terms of when you're looking at what is more innovative than the other, LoopPay and Apple Pay are essentially, the execution-wise, the same thing. But if you're looking at what's innovative, it's the UX. The UX, the user experience, is the science here. It's not the fintech backend. It's how you actually make the person feel when they actually execute the action. So in that perspective, I think Samsung will have to be more innovative because Apple owns their ecosystem. They own the experience. So they can do whatever the hell they want with it. But Samsung has to always deal with Google. So in that perspective, Apple, if Samsung wants to be in parity with that UX, that science, they have to work very closely with Google, or this is not going to be a competition that can be easily won here.
Right. I don't have an opinion on LoopPay or Apple Pay, but because we're in 3 different markets, we get to experience 3 different payment systems. Alipay, LGU Plus for Korea, Stripe for the US. A big topic in our company is, how different the receivables and payables are, and also how low the commissions can go. It's 2.x for Korea and the US versus China is 0.x. So, we always give this example, maybe you could go down to 1.x, and the receivables, for example, in the US is 3 business days versus in Korea is plus 30 days. So those are the topics that we very much talk about, and commission is always a big topic for any e-commerce companies. How low can they go?
Okay, so speaking of Samsung and Apple, there's obviously kind of hardware wars between Samsung and Apple. You could characterize them like US and Asia maybe, but if you look at e-commerce, a lot, like the past 5 years, I've spent studying Amazon, right? They were the Bible of e-commerce in many ways, okay? And now with Alibaba, other huge Rakuten, local players here in Korea, there's big e-commerce players. What will people be studying from Asian players in 5 to 10 years when we think about the innovation that's coming out of this region versus the innovation that came out of Amazon for the past 10 plus years?
Kind of how will Asia shape e-commerce differently than how?
Yeah, definitely. Like what will be the, if Jack Ma or Baum Kim writes their version of a book about them, like the Everything Store is written, right? What are they going to write about here that's unique that people may someday export to their local country?
Well, I guess you just have to look at initially the question is just when you use the term Asia, it's just such a large word. And so 5-10 years from now, I think people will look back and say, a company that dominated this space and did well will look at this word Asia and this space called Asia and say, hey, look, we were able to identify how we were able to penetrate each market in a specific way. We were culturally relevant. And as we were talking constantly today was, how can you make sure that the user experience is always seamless? And so whereas Amazon was dominating the United States, I think the next global player that dominates this space in Asia is going to be the one that says, we understood how China, Japan, Korea, the Southeast Asia, while it's all one big pot, how they're each individually different and how we reacted to that to give those users a different experience that was special to them.
Actually, with the time remaining, can we talk about Southeast Asia for a second?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, if you look at what's happening, well, to take a step back, the influence has already been started, right? Because, in many ways, the Asian messaging players have started the messaging plus e-commerce boom.
Right.
And that has kind of moved into how Tango is building out an in-app store marketplace with Alibaba and Walmart, right? So in that perspective, the influence has already started. And that being said, if you look at Southeast Asia as a whole, everyone was really, really, looking forward to how the e-commerce boom would happen and how 600 million people would start buying online. That speed of uptake has actually slowed down. It's not as hockey stick as everyone would have thought. So what's actually happening is that a lot of the money is regressing back into more traditional online commerce platforms like listings marketplaces and C2C marketplaces, where you have the overall liquidity, and then you can add some value-added services like ad tech and escrow services on top of it to be able to make it sustainable. So the old adage of let's build this up and wait for the ecosystem to actually be mature is not something that's being, at least, pontificated right now in Southeast Asia, just because of the slowed growth trend we're looking at.
I think we have time for one last question. I guess for each of you, I would ask, we have a lot of young startups here that are in e-commerce. What would be your number one piece of advice for each of these startups if you could just give one piece of advice that are in e-commerce?
One piece of advice. I would probably say what I see too often is I think people are always striving to build a company, but I think people should strive to build a service, and there's a difference between that. When you look at Minjok, I don't think our deputy came out and said, I want to build a company. He said, I wanted to build a service to make it easier for people to order food. When Mi미박스 started, it wasn't your dream says, I just want to start a company. He says, I want to give great products to the right people. Even a baker says, I don't want to build a bakery. They say, I want to make the best bread ever. So for people in this space, my piece of advice would be build a great service. What is the challenge people are facing? The dream is not to build a company. The dream is to build a service to make life easier, whether that's Uber, so I can sit in my hotel room, order a car, and get someplace. And so build a great service. Don't build a company. The company will come along if you have a great service.
Yeah, I'll make my answer short. On the qualitative side, I think overemphasizing on people and culture. And on the quantitative side, I think it could be engineering and logistics.
If you look at e-commerce as a whole, I would ask the founders who want to build a company or product to take a step back and understand that e-commerce is just another form of consumption, right? So think about consumption as a whole and see what your service builds out meaningfully. to me, in many ways, a newsreader is a form of e-commerce in that they have many, many good semantic relationships with buying a product or being happy with a product. So take a little step back, look at it in a bigger picture and see how you want to make online consumption meaningful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.